Ah, this summertime. The best time of the year for those who can afford it. For others, it mainly means additional hardship in their day-to-day life caused by the intense heat and the relentlessly beating sun. I'm a bit in between the two, since I do get to take out my boats every now and then, but for the most part I'm among those suffering from the harsh conditions that the midsummer poses. And so thanks to this suffering, I can now show you the progress that I've made on my 40-foot steel yacht. Yeah, this darn shower cabin. If I ever underestimated the amount of time and effort required for a project, then this will be the one. You see, aside from the large obvious elements, such as welding in some steel to create a solid base, or cutting and trimming those large wooden panels, there are just so many small details, so many things to figure out, that it simply requires a lot of time to turn into reality. So today I'm gonna first show you a few of those small details I worked on recently, and then we're gonna move on to spray painting the wooden panels. I'll start by attaching the left side panel firmly to the boat by first drilling a few holes, then adding a few bolts, so that I can bolt it to the steel flat profile. Next, I need to add some stability to this outer wall of the shower cabin. For this, I'm simply gonna use a small stainless steel angle, which I'm gonna bolt to one of the L profiles coming down from the ceiling. Next, I'm gonna close the gap between the boards I just mentioned. Here I need to make sure that the door frame I create in this way has perfectly parallel sides. I add some wood screws only on one side, because on the other side the board will be held in place by the rail for the sliding door. I got a beautiful plywood plate for the door, which I'm gonna attach with these plastic parts I recovered from the old door. The board for the door is just thick enough so that I can drill a hole right down the middle, where I can then screw in the bolts from those plastic parts. Now I can hang in the door and adjust the height with those nuts and bolts on top of those plastic pieces. To keep the door steady, I'm gonna install this little wheel at the base of the door. A second wheel on the other side of the door will keep the door at an equal distance from the outer wall along its track. I'm gonna embed this second wheel by carving out a rectangular shape into the wood at a specific depth. Next, let's scratch off some items from the list in the floor area, such as the cutouts for the 4 water hoses that need to pass through the floor. The drain for the shower tub, another set of hoses needs to pass through this board right next to the service hatch. I need to add a point of attachment to these ribs here, something where I can drill a wood screw into. So I first drill a 6mm hole into the steel. Then I cut 2 wooden blocks out of leftover oak wood. I drill a 6mm hole into those. I sand the edges. And then I can bolt them onto the ribs. I need to make a cutout for the water hoses into this board. And so now, thanks to those wooden blocks I just made earlier, I can screw this board firmly in place. This is now rock solid, and it can even handle if a person were to step on it. Next I need to add a new through hull for the drain of the shower sump. I'm gonna place this one here below the one I installed earlier for the bilge pump. Somehow I didn't quite hit the center of the hole I cut into the isolation material. Not a big problem though. Next I'm gonna cut a spacer out of wood to put between the through hull fitting and the steel hull of the boat. I got this brass through hull fitting, same one as I installed before, and I cut a couple of rubber gaskets. I put the through hull fitting in place from the outside, securing it with a piece of duct tape. Now I can add the wooden spacer and a nut to bolt it down. And with that, I got all the through hulls needed on this side of the boat. The wooden panel, which is gonna cover that area, is slightly bent, which is actually not too bad because the wall of the boat is also bent. Unfortunately, the panel is bent in the wrong direction. So I'm attempting to bend it in the other direction by placing a few weights on top of it and leaving it like this for a few days. Finally, I cut the holes for the through hulls into the wooden plate. I got this shower faucet, which I'm gonna install in the left side wooden panel. So I'm drilling 2 holes to get the hot and cold water supply through. I got these 90-degree adapters, which I'm simply gonna feed through from behind. And with that, the shower faucet is already installed. I'm also gonna drill 2 holes for the hot and cold water tubes, but I'm gonna leave the installation of this for right before I install the shower cabin indefinitely. In the ceiling above the shower area there is a vent. Unfortunately, the thread of this one is completely rotten away. So I'm gonna replace it with this one here in perfect condition all the way aft of the boat. First I'm gonna remove the one above the shower area. I clean up the base a little and then put down a coat of primer. Next I'm gonna repeat the exact same thing with the vent in the roof of the aft cabin. To install the vents, I'm simply gonna use Sikaflex. In my experience, this is totally sufficient to keep these items in place. I do the same thing for the vent above the shower area. And so now we got a working vent in our shower cabin. For now, I'm just gonna add a coat of primer on the outside. Finally, I'm gonna cut a hole into the ceiling plate to install this ring, which I recovered from the original installation. Alright, now you are all caught up with the little details I added recently, and I'm really interested in what you think of the solutions I've come up with, because I actually learn a lot from the comments that you post below my videos. The problem is that the advice usually comes after the deed is done. And I'm sure you've also experienced that someone would look at your boat and tell you a better approach for a given problem, wouldn't it be nice if we could ask for advice before we start the work? To facilitate this, I have created a Facebook group called My First Boat Community, and I hope that it becomes a place where you and me can ask for advice on any given topics about boating, boat building, and boat restoration, so that one of the countless, very knowledgeable boat experts that linger on this channel can share in their experience and help us all save time and money and potentially avoid disaster. So I hope to see you there in great numbers. Find the link in the description, and I've already posted the first question, so I'm really looking forward to your input. Next, it's time to disassemble the entire cabin once more, because now we move on to painting. I've already showed you my spray paint gun briefly in a previous video, and so today I'm gonna give you a more detailed look. I'm gonna show you my first steps and missteps and everything I learned along the way. First, let's have a look at how a spray paint gun works. There are various adjustment knobs on the spray paint gun itself. With the one here at the back, you can adjust how far the trigger travels and thus how much paint you release. With the one here on the side, you can adjust the angle of the jet coming out of the pistol. By rotating the nozzle here in the front, you can define whether the beam comes out horizontally or vertically. At the bottom of the gun, you can adjust the amount of air coming inside the pistol. Between the gun and the compressor, we have a pressure gauge with an adjustment knob to control the pressure at which the air comes into the pistol. And when all the adjustments are at the right setting, you can achieve a very nice and even spray beam. And finally, at the very bottom, we have a water separator. Alright, now let's go back to the very beginning, where I want you to join me across the different steps of my learning curve along every mistake and misfortune that occurred each time learning a valuable lesson about spray painting. In my very first try, I made the mistake to have the nozzle set for a horizontally oriented beam, which gives you a very narrow spraying pattern when doing a sideward movement. Plus, you're very likely gonna apply too much paint, which I found to be worse than not applying enough. It took me a while to figure this out, but once I did and adjusted the spray paint gun, I got a much better result from here on out. Another very important element is the distance you keep between the spray paint gun and the object. Too close and you're likely to apply too much paint. Too far and the paint will dissipate before even reaching the object. In my case here, I have another problem coming from the compressor losing pressure too quickly, forcing me to go closer and closer to the object in order to compensate for the weaker and weaker beam. Now, despite these issues in the beginning, I managed to achieve a relatively satisfying result. While far from perfect, it is light years away from anything I could achieve with a brush or a roll. When I was finally bothered enough, I went out and got a more powerful compressor. This one here has 2 pistons, which means it can build up pressure twice as fast. Now, all the issues put aside, the first results were quite impressive. Before each round of spray painting, I'm gonna sand down the object with a 180 or 240 grained sandpaper. Now with the new, more powerful compressor, you can see that my spray paint beam remains consistent throughout the entire run. In this run, the gun suddenly stopped spitting out any paint. It turned out the little filter that sits below the paint container was clogged. So I quickly replaced it and went on with the job. And so, with all the issues resolved, and presumably a perfectly adjusted spray paint gun, the only thing I really need to watch out for is the distance to the object and my travel speed. What followed were several days, actually weeks, of sanding, painting, then waiting a few days, and then repeat the whole process again until all the sides of all the boards have at least 4 to 5 layers of varnish on them. At some point I got a second tent, thinking that with 2 tents I can double my output. In this way, surely I will be done with painting in no time. Now that I think about it, a single tent is actually better. In this way I can focus much more on the individual boards and hopefully get a better result. And of course, when it rains, it pours. In this case, literally, so that the boards from the second tent that I put into the first tent got soaked with water and these water stains appeared. Luckily though, I managed to reduce the appearance of them, so let's move on. All in all, I got mixed results from spray painting by this point. Some areas turned out really nice. In others, I got these weird kind of bubbles in the surface. They seem to only appear during the drying process and only when the paint layer is relatively thick. I tried playing around with different dilution ratios, different spray paint gun settings, letting the previous coat cure for a few days longer, but nothing really seemed to help, so I figured it must be the varnish itself. So I got the varnish from a different manufacturer together with a special thinner for resin-based paints. And indeed, with this new varnish thinner combination, I managed to get rid of this annoying phenomena. And so, after applying and letting cure another couple of coats on the current batch of boards, we can have a look at the result. Right away, you can see that the texture of the surface is absolutely smooth. Seen against the light, you can see a very even gloss in all the areas. To the touch, it almost feels like an industrially worked piece of wood. This time, again, probably thanks to this new varnish thinner combination, I don't have any of these bubbles I showed you before. The only imperfections I ended up with in the surface of the varnish are the occasional grain of dust or insects that sat down before the varnish was sufficiently cured. I made sure to apply a very thick layer at all the borders, because that's where the humidity is later most likely to soak in. And so now, before moving on to the final session of painting, I'm going to put everything together one last time to make sure I don't have to do any additional trimming or cuts to make everything fit together. And with that, you may now feast your eyes on my structurally almost finished shower cabin, which may have taken me forever to put together, but I hope you agree that it was worth it. And I hope you forgive me that it's still not finished. But rest assured, come hell or high water, you will see me take a shower in this thing really soon. Alright, now, that is all from me for today. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end and for supporting me in these challenging times.